Hello and welcome to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. I'm Dino Verrelli, founder and CEO of Project Purple. We've got an exciting interview coming up with a very special guest after a few quick updates. Since 2010, we've contributed over $3 million and counting towards pancreatic cancer research efforts. We've also allocated over $1,500,000 to more than 1,700 patients and families through our patient aid programs. Your monthly or one-time gift can improve patients' lives through research and assistance programs. You can donate now at projectpurple.org. Pancreatic cancer does not rest, and neither will we. Your support is truly appreciated. If you're looking to get involved in one of our events, whether that means joining a run team, participating in a virtual run walk, group fitness, golf, or anything else you can think of, visit projectpurple.org/events to learn more. Without further ado, let's meet our special guest today, coming to us all the way from the middle of the country, Iowa. So if you do not know, Iowa is the middle of the country here, but former Major League Baseball umpire and pancreatic cancer survivor. We call them superhumans here at Larry. So I might use the term superhuman. It's because we believe our survivors are superhuman. But Larry Young, thank you for joining me here on the Project Purple podcast.
Hi, Dino. How you doing? It's funny, when I was going through surgery, I had a Superman shirt on. So that kind of fit in.
I love it. I love it. I love it. You know, we're big on survivorship, and the survivors inspire us every day here at Project Purple. That's why we do what we do. Why I get up, and we came up with that term I think a couple years back, and this podcast. I know we were connecting before we hit record here, has really become something really, really cool for me personally to get the opportunity to interview so many people. And really COVID kind of pushed that. Like once COVID came, people were like reaching out to us, just sharing their stories and wanting to share stories from all over the world. So I love bringing superhumans on because I think this is probably the most important awareness piece that we have to share these stories of how people have gone through that journey. So with that, I'm going to hand over the mic over to you, and this is your opportunity. And as I tell all the guests, Larry, you take us where you want to go. So you can stay as high level as you want, or you can get as deep in the weeds, and the microphone is yours.
Well, you talk about survivors, and I'm going to use the term superhumans. That is pretty applicable to what we go through. And I've met many people when they hear that you've had pancreatic cancer, they don't expect the outcome to be someone that has survived. And I've met a lot of people who have survived long term. I've met a 52-year survivor, superhuman, and Bob Uecker, who is a lot of people know is the broadcaster for the Milwaukee Brewers, and one of the great guys is a 22-year survivor. So there are a lot of survivors out there, and hopefully there's going to be more and more. My journey started 9 years ago. I'm a 9-year superhuman. Is that what the term you use?
We're using super. I love using superhuman.
Superhuman. I do too. I love that. I've never heard that before. But I started this journey not knowing, and that was the problem at that time because there were no symptoms. When someone found out that they had this disease, a lot of times it had metastasized, and there was little hope. Now there's much more hope, and much more research is going in. More is needed, obviously. But I found out that I had a problem when I was doing an umpire clinic. I was teaching an umpire clinic. I travel all over the world now in my job as a supervisor of umpires. I've been to 26 different countries with my job and looking for international umpires. So I was in Amsterdam doing a umpire clinic, and I was feeling great, but there was a strange thing going on. My urine was a strange color of orange. So I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was a travel. I thought it was, maybe stress, whatever. But I finished the clinic, and then I had meetings in New York, and our trainer came up to me and says, "What's wrong with you? You look terrible." I said, "What are you talking about? I feel great." He says, "No, your eyes are jaundiced. Your skin is yellow. What's going on?" And then I told him about the urine, and he says, that's not good. We need to get you in. And next day, he had connections. He got me in at NYU to have a CAT scan. And that's when they found out there was a mass on the head of my pancreas. So that's what started it. Just the fact that this dear friend of mine, Mark Laton, was able to recognize the symptoms, and that's what started the whole thing.
Wow. So before let me just say this, Larry. I use the term loaded questions. All my questions are loaded. And what I mean by that is they're thought provoking, not that they're like, no negative connotation here, but this is the first loaded question. And hindsight's always 2020. But as you look back, I mean, being a major league umpire, you've got to be in physical shape. You're on the road a lot. Um, could you look back now, or have you done this exercise before where you said, 2 years before that, I had this episode of, diarrhea for, 2 weeks straight, but hey, I was traveling and, I think maybe I picked something up or ate something in a foreign country and it just didn't sit right. And I just couldn't regulate until I got back home to the States. And maybe that was kind of a precursor. Or, hey, my back, we were talking before, I've traveled a ton. And, when you're on the road, man, you're just like a road warrior, man. You're just on the go. And sometimes you're not sleeping in the best of beds, whether you're on plane, trains, and automobiles. Mm-hmm. Like you've got this lower back pain that just persisted while you're on the road. And then finally, when you get home, it like goes away and you don't think anything of it. So was there any time before that you probably look back and say, yeah, maybe that was something that was kind of like a precursor?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that because my wife and I talk about that all the time. We were in Italy, and I was doing an umpire clinic in Italy. My wife was with me, and I got sick, really sick in the middle of the night. And, the diarrhea and throwing up and I never get that. I was never sick, hardly ever sick. And I was so sick that I could not answer the bell the next day. I couldn't go to work. I never miss work. So I left them in a little bit of a lurch because I wasn't able to work for 2 days while I was in Italy. And then suddenly I was better, and I was, had no reoccurrence for another year. But my wife is really adamant in thinking that was a warning signal. And I just thought it was maybe the flu. This is pre-COVID, so it wasn't COVID, but we thought it was something else. And we really think that was related to the pancreatic cancer diagnosis that came later.
And family history and also history of yourself, any type of cancers or illnesses, nothing.
Zero within our family. And that's what made the diagnosis shocking. We had, my dad and my uncles had heart problems, and they died actually at a young age, and some in their 40s, some in their 50s. So that would not have been a surprise to me, but we had no cancer in either side of my family. So that was another thing that was very strange. Now, since then, I had a first cousin that developed pancreatic cancer, and he passed away within a year and went through the Whipple, went through the radiation, went through everything to, hopefully have a good outcome, but it did not turn out that way. So we actually thought, now maybe there is something. We did do genetic testing to find out that there is no genes that are in our family, which is a consolation to my daughters. So, we thought that was too much of a coincidence, but no, we had no cancer in our family.
And that genetic testing was post, like this didn't happen when you got diagnosed. This was after.
Yes, yeah. Well after, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, because if we're going back 9 years, I mean, I think the guideline changed back in like 2019, 2020, where now, like, if you get diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, the center's supposed to do germline testing, genetic testing on the tumor. Fascinating piece of that is, so that was a NIH guideline I just saw a study like 6 months ago. They said like only 40% of patients in the last like 4 years have been tested. So it's just crazy that, it stems from the top to say like, hey, this has to be done, but it's still not being done at a it's being done at a very low rate, which is just wild. So that's why I always say like, bringing awareness to these things, on the
Mhm.
podcast is so important. So you get this initial diagnosis, you're in New York City, you're working, then where do you go from there?
Well, I didn't have the diagnosis yet. They did notice that there was a mass, a
Mass.
suspicious mass on the head of the pancreas, which I learned that it's better to be on the head than the tail.
Correct.
It was easier to get to. But I finished the meetings and was on my way to Chicago. Again, Mark Laton, who was the trainer, called ahead to Rush Hospital and said that gave him all the details of the CAT scan. So when I landed, I had a message to call Rush, and they said call her right away. And I called and said, They said you need to come in so we can take a look at this. I said, okay, I'll be in a couple of days. They said, no, you come right to the airport from the airport. We need to hear it right now. So that's when the journey started. The journey started in New York, but the journey continued, I should say. They did, I can't remember the procedure, but they go down inside, get a
EUS.
biopsy,
Yeah.
and that's when we found out that, it was benign, I'm sorry, malignant, and not a good prognosis, I would say. We met with the doctor, my wife and I sat in the room and he came in and said, I have bad news. He said, you have pancreatic cancer. So I asked two questions right away. One was, that's the bad one, isn't it? And he kind of said, well, listen, there are no good ones. And then he proceeded to tell me the mortality rate. And it sounded very, very bad. And then I said, how much time do I have? Well, he was kind of a little guy and he jumped up. He was sitting on the edge of the desk. He jumped up and he got right in my face. Now, I've had people in my face for years. I've had Billy Martin in my face and Earl Weaver in my face. Now I've got this doctor in my face. And he more or less screamed at me and said, hey, we're not going to think that way. And he said, I'm really good. And if I can get this thing shrunk enough, I can go in and get it. And we're gonna attack this thing, but it's going to be a fight. And he said, are you ready to fight? Before I could say anything, my wife says, yes, let's go. So that's what happened. He said, well, we're going to have to, it's too close to an artery right now. If I go in and try to remove this and I nick that artery, you're going to die on the table. So he said, we're going to have to shrink this to get it away from the artery. So we're going to have to do radiation and some chemo right away. And that's when we started. They did shrink it enough so that he could go in and remove it. After that, it's called the Whipple surgery. Everyone is familiar with that. As I understand, they're not doing as many Whipples as they used to. And the Whipple is a very tough surgery. I didn't think I was going to make it, to be quite honest with you. But
Why do you say that?
why do I say I wasn't going to make it?
Yeah. Why do you say that?
The day after the Whipple, he told me what to expect. He says, this is going to be a tough surgery. This is going to be the toughest thing you've gone through. I know you think you're this tough guy and you played football and so on, but this is tough. And he's right. It kicked my butt. And I say that not to sugarcoat it, because people that need to go through the Whipple have to know that they're in for a fight. But the next day, everything started shutting down. My heart started acting erratically. My blood pressure wouldn't come down. Lungs, everything was shutting down. So the next day, from 8 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night, I went from one test to another, and it was totally exhausting that day. About at 10 o'clock at night, I just told my wife, I said, I don't think I'm going to make it. So she said, well, you have to fight. He said, your grandsons need you. I need you. My daughter here need you. Um, I said, I'm trying, but I don't think I have any fight left. And I made it through that night. I'm not sure how. I woke up in the middle of the night and I was out of it. I thought someone was trying to kill me. I had all these needles in me, and I thought someone was trying to kill me. And it was a horrible, 24 hours. The next day, things started to get better and better and better. And, still the fight was not over because once I was supposed to be in the hospital. I was in intensive care for 5 days. I was supposed to be in the hospital for 2 weeks, but they let me go after 5 days. And then the chemo started, radiation started. I was very fortunate that I didn't have any reactions from the chemo. Most people do. I didn't lose any hair, or what's little hair I have left. Didn't get sick, and but it was a fight. It really was, and we were lucky to make it through.
So go back to that. So you get through all the complications, and the reason why I asked the question, Larry, I mean, I think a lot of people, I mean, I think psychologically people get diagnosed and then they do some research and they're like, oh, I got to have the Whipple, but the Whipple's a no joke surgery. I mean, it's usually anywhere between 8 and 10 hours. As you said, there's complications, right? There's this whole inner working. We've had doctors on, surgeons that we've kind of gone through the Whipple, and you know, it's probably the most complex surgery of all surgeries, is what I've heard from surgeons. So I think people know that the Whipple is the way to eliminate the cancer, but also have to understand the complexity of that surgery, because it's not a simple surgery to do. And there are a lot of complications post that you described, but then also, there's bleeds, or, your GI issues, just like your whole GI tract is reworked.
Yeah.
Like it's
your
like
gallbladder's gone.
correct. Sometimes your spleen,
I didn't have the spleen, but your intestines are switched around.
Correct.
Just in layman's terms, there was nothing easy about it. And the surgeon told me, he said it's going to be very, very tough surgery. And now, as I understand, and you know better than I do, there are alternatives now to the Whipple. I don't know. The Whipple's been around for 50 years.
50 years. And there hasn't been many improvements, in terms of options, I would say. I mean, there's some. I mean, so now, like, we see some people do like splenectomies where, and depending on where the tumor is will determine like whether you get a full Whipple or the splenectomy. The one thing that has happened, which is just recent, Larry, though, which is interesting, hearing your case, where I think in the past, I think the margins in terms of resectability have actually increased, but there's complexity in that, where now, like, I was just talking to one of the teams at a conference back in October, and they were talking about how their surgical team now is doing more Whipples that the last 5 years they would have passed on because those tumors were too close to that artery. But what they're doing now, though, is they're bringing in vascular surgeons as teams with the surgical oncologist. So you have the surgical oncologist, who goes in and resects everything. They clamp off that artery, and then you have the vascular teams, which are surgeons that, because usually surgical oncologists aren't designed, like, they're not trained to recreate arteries. That's not part of their repertoire. But now what's happening is you're getting these surgeons to work with the surgical oncologists to work with the vascular surgeons to recreate that artery so that they can do some of these surgeries that they wouldn't do before. Now there's a lot of complexity in that, like recreating an artery. And actually that's why they bring in the vascular expertise. So I think there's more surgeries being done actually that are probably more complex than they would have done, 10, even 5 years ago, because of some of the expertise that they're bringing in and realizing like, hey, we can't do this alone. which is awesome to see. But that's not happening everywhere. That's happening at, major cancer centers, where they have expertise in that. And I think just like with any procedure, you just have to weigh the pros and cons. And
Yeah.
not everybody's going to fit that box as well. It sounds like you had a positive response to the chemotherapy initially because you saw tumor shrinkage. And that's usually an indication of like being a surgical candidate. If you're seeing positive responses to the chemotherapy,
Yeah.
then they'll do that.
I did have some vascular work done. I wasn't on the artery. I mean, they didn't want to touch that artery, but there was
Yeah.
some vascular work done. But the big thing was at that time, the good news was that you're eligible for surgery because that
Yeah.
was the only way to survive this sneaky bastard. And I, as I understand, there are some inroads made since then. There are other ways to survive, but at the time that was it. And if you couldn't have the surgery, that was not good news.
Yeah, yeah, and I think like there's a lot of stuff happening. There's just not enough, right? And as we said
Mhm.
before we hit record, this is just a super complex cancer, probably the most complex cancer from a biological standpoint and from a scientific standpoint. So, the funding is needed. Like we need a gigantic influx of cash from all sources, government, private, pharma, to really put a big dent in this. So going back to your journey here, you have the surgery, you come out, you get through these complications, and then you do chemo radiation. So, what would you say from start to finish, from when you were given the diagnosis at Rush, which was just shortly thereafter, after that, the screen at NYU that told you had a mass on the head of the pancreas, to your last treatment? How long was that time?
The last treatment, it was 16 treatments every other week. I'd say 4 or 5 months.
So you
So,
come out of everything, they let you ring the bell, you're done with
yeah.
treatment.
Well,
You
that
know
took a
what?
while. No, that took longer.
Oh,
That was until I could ring the bell. That was 6 years.
6 years.
Yeah, every 6 months I would get a scan, and my wife would go in, and we'd go in and wait for the scan. And the doctor, who was didn't have much of a person, this doctor didn't have much of a personality, but when he came in with the clean
And
scan,
you stayed with them?
he was dancing, and he said it's clean. And we did this twice a year for 6 years. And every time we said, well, we got another 6 months. We got another 6 months. And at the end of that, some doctors say 5 years, some say six. This doctor
Yeah.
said six. And he came in and says, well, we don't want to see you anymore. Um, we have sick people to take care of. We don't want to see you anymore. So, but what I do want you guys to do is go down and ring the bell.
So
And
they had you ring the bell at the end of that tenure versus at the end of the treatment, like when you were
yes.
done with
Oh
chemo.
yeah, we weren't done with the journey yet. We weren't done with the fight yet. It took that long to make sure that it was gone.
But now during those 6 years, you were just doing scans in terms of just making sure everything was in check. You weren't on any medications
No,
for the
well,
cancer.
medications, yes.
Medications not related to fighting off cancer, though. Like you weren't
No,
doing chemo or radiation or anything
no,
like that.
no. That took, as I said, I think I had 16 every 2 weeks,
Yep.
and do the math. So four or
Yeah.
5 months, I said, thanks.
So during that time frame, then Larry, like what was the mindset like for you? Because okay, so you're going, I know people tend to call this like scanxiety, I guess is the term
Yes,
that a lot of people use. So did you have scanxiety? I mean, I know
sure.
you just said like, hey, your wife would say, all right, we got another 6 months. Like, so
Yeah. We didn't expect this outcome, because of the statistics
yeah,
and the odds and so on. Um, so every time that we had another clean scan, it was another lease on life. We wanted to keep things as normal as possible. So I returned to work quicker than I should have. My wife wasn't happy about that, but I returned to work a couple months afterwards, and we just wanted to keep going with our life. We have a good life. We have a wonderful family. And that's the other thing that I think it's the biggest thing actually is the support. Uh, couldn't have gone through it alone. And my wife was there for every treatment, for every checkup, for every scan. My daughters were there. That is hugely important. You just can't do it alone. And if you have a support group that's giving you encouragement and giving you a reason to live, hugely important.
So I'm glad you brought this up. That was one of my notes here to talk about family and friends and support. And we always say, like, no one should ever fight this thing alone. I shared a little bit of my story before and talked about that support that we had there for my dad. But a question that comes up often, Larry, and we get a lot of calls here, and a lot of people, I'm sure, think about this as they watch this podcast when they listen to superhumans talk about their journeys, their experiences. I just had someone reach out to me recently and said, "Hey, my neighbor just got diagnosed. What should I do for that person?" So my question to you is, in your journey, what was some of the things, if you don't have to use names or point any people out, but things that like really like made a difference from friends and family during that time? Because I think a lot of people just don't know what to do for someone that's going through that.
Well, the word cancer is scary enough. The two words together, pancreatic cancer, is very, very scary. It is the bad one. So trying to keep it as normal as possible, and it's hard to do because sometimes you just don't feel like if you don't feel well,
Yeah.
but having that support from my wife and family, and then also friends that try to keep things as normal as possible. And on the good days, enjoy it. And the bad days, you just say you're going to get through it. You're just going to have to keep fighting. It is a fight. It is an absolute fight. And I don't discount that. But it also can be a positive getting through. There are superhumans out there. So I think that the fact that talking to other superhumans is going to help. And I do a lot of that through Rush Hospital, which
Yeah.
I'm eternally grateful for what they've done to me, and Dr. Meyer, who was a genius. But I think talking to other people that have been through this and knowing that it's going to be a fight, but it can be won.
Powerful. So let's talk. I just talk about your career. So you were a Major League Baseball umpire for many, many years. You were in a lot of probably high pressure situations. Uh, you know, making it, and I know we talked about this before. And not that I was ever at that level, but as an official of any sports, you've got to make that decision right away, how you see it, and it's got to be the call, right? And you've got the pressure, regardless of the level, someone's not going to be happy with that call, right?
Well, 50% are going to be happy.
Yeah, true.
The other
Very true.
50%, not so much.
Not so much. But okay, so we take this to the professional level now. You've got the stress of like, okay, one, you're on TV, so you have the people at home watching. Two, you're, in a ballpark with, 50, 60, 70,000 fans, right? And to your point, yeah, you got 50%, but that 50% is a big 50%. So I guess my point is here is like the stress of that there, I guess not stress, but the pressure, right, of making those decisions and being in those moments and making the right calls is not easy. And then navigating through that all. Have you ever looked at kind of like, and I'm always kind of fascinated, like what people have done before cancer and how that prepared them. And you also were an athlete, so you dealt with rejection and goal setting and getting to a certain level, but didn't win every game potentially. But do you ever look back at like your life experience? And I know you were retired at the time, but I'm sure you probably still had pressures of being in professional sports and that job day to day. But look at what you did before kind of help prepare you for where you were when you got this diagnosis.
I'm not sure. You know, you're right. There was a lot of pressure as an umpire, and there's also a lot of stress. Stress, travel. You work 3 games, and then you pack up and you go to the next place, and you don't even really think much about it. I look back at it now and said, "Wow, that was hard." But at the time, I didn't think about it because I was feeding my family, and I put one foot in front of the other and kept moving.
Yeah.
So, but the stress level is high. All the games are televised. All the games are scrutinized. It's even worse now with instant replay. I didn't work in the replay era. I'm still working as a supervisor, and I see that with our people, and I see a lot of stress there. I don't know. I often wonder, and I think there's um, something to it, that stress may have contributed to not only my cancers but other cancers. You know, I have some friends that have gone through from the umpire that have also gone through cancer. Um,
Not the stress, Larry. I guess I want to correct myself here. Not so much from stress, but I feel like that in this way, maybe that stress was good in some way because you're put in that situation where like man like that's like you've gone through this exercise of making those decisions, but then like you're given this cancer diagnosis and you've got to make a decision, right? Like we got to go with this doctor, we got to fight for my life. Similar to like in your position, like hey, you mentioned Billy Martin, right? Like Billy Martin's coming out of the dugout to yell and scream at you. It's kind of like not to I kind of am comparing like him to cancer, but like in that moment, he's swearing or whatever. I'm sure he wasn't saying nice things,
well,
but
pancreatic cancer was screaming at me as well.
that's what I'm
And
saying here. So, like
you had
being in
to.
those situations, like that correlation of being in like a high stressful job or being able to make those decisions almost like pilots, right? Like or athletes, like they train and then they have this defeat or they have success, but then like you go on and you do this cancer journey or you've had this experience previously in your life, and yes, it's your job, it's feeding your family, you're building a career, you're very successful at it, but then now you get this cancer journey, and some of those experiences that you experience in that real job, that day-to-day job, prepare you for that cancer journey, I guess is the question.
Yeah. Well, I think there's 2 ways of facing it. You either say basically give up, and I've heard of people that have gotten this diagnosis and they've heard about the Whipple and they just said, "I'm not going to do that," and I can see that. Or you can face it, know that it's going to be a fight, and then fight. And
Yeah.
the physical part of it, as an athlete, you go through. I played football at the collegiate level, and those practices were tough. Those were strenuous. I knew this was going to be strenuous, and it was. So I think that part of facing it helped that I was used to pressure. But this is a totally different pressure. The pressure in my job is to get plays right in a game. The pressure of getting through the Whipple surgery was life and death.
I got a couple questions left here for you, and then we're going to share where our audience can connect if there's someone out there that's going through their own journey and maybe they're facing the Whipple as a decision. Given what you've gone through, your experience, what you've done, and these are loaded questions, Larry, and there's no right or wrong. What's advice? And I know we've given out a bunch of things here, but maybe there's a couple of things that we haven't mentioned, for someone who's going through, let's say someone gets a diagnosis today. Again, given your journey, what advice would you give them? What are a couple of things that you would say to them that they, must haves or must do's?
I would make sure that you have a support system. I think that's highly important. Make sure that you make these decisions together, because when you are in the hospital and you're sick, or if you've gone through the Whipple, you're going to need somebody that's thinking clearly to help you get through it. And that's where your support system comes in. I would do, and this is just me, I would do everything you possibly could to defeat this. If it's the Whipple, if it's chemo, if it's radiation, none of those three things are pleasant. In fact, they're very tough, but I would do everything possible and not give up. And we didn't.
During your journey, was there a mantra that you used or something that you found that was like super helpful?
I think that what my wife told me when I was really sick and I didn't think I was going to make it is that there were people there that needed me, and it was my grandson. I spent a lot of times with a lot of time with my two grandsons, and I never would have had that if it wasn't for fighting. And I've seen them grow. I really, I go to all their sporting events. We're very close. My daughters are close to me. That's what you fight for. If not for yourself, it's for those people.
It's so powerful. Try not to get choked up a little bit because it brings me back to my dad. My dad was at a
I
lot.
know. Yeah, I'm having a little problem myself here.
So, but thank you for sharing that. You know, I'm just going to say this, Larry. You know, something that I think is lost in you know where we are today as a society is family, and that was something that was really really important to me. And I've heard family so much from this conversation, and I just want to thank you for bringing that up. You know, society, like social media, certainly plays a part in it. I guess I'm going to try not to go on a rant here, but I think with battling anything, and especially pancreatic cancer, family is so critical, and regardless of where people are in family, whether that's like, blended or whatever, but it's just so critical to have people around you. And it's just so special to hear how much you bring up your wife and your daughters and how much your grandkids were to you during this journey and still are, in terms of fighting. So I just think it's just important. And I just really appreciate you bringing that up. And not to go down that road here because I'm going to get a little choked up when we think about this because that was just such an important piece to me and my dad in our journey. So thank you. Last question here, and this is always the loaded of the loaded questions. Given your experience, there's no right or wrong to this. How do you define the term pancreatic cancer? What's your definition of it?
Besides the sneaky bastard,
I like that one.
Well, before I went through this journey, I knew two people that had passed away. They were people that I had refereed football with and were friends, and I knew that there wasn't much hope. Once the diagnosis came, and when we received that diagnosis, we were told that about the mortality rates, and they're very, very low. Now, I would define it as something that can be beat. There is more hope every day. There are things getting better every day. It's not necessarily the death sentence that it was 9 years ago, 10 years ago. I would just define it as something that is going to be a challenge, going to be a fight. You may lose it, but if you don't fight it, you won't win it.
Powerful stuff, Larry. Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to share your journey here on the Project Purple podcast. For someone listening, maybe they just got diagnosed, as we said before, and they're facing a Whipple maybe, and they want to reach out to you. I know you mentioned you do some work with Rush, which is a great institution there in Chicago. Is there a place for people to connect or reach out to you that we could share?
Yeah, I will give you my email address
Sure.
because I think it's actually my duty to give back and tell people about so far a success story. Never out of the woods, we never are, but I could give my experiences and what they need to look forward to or what it's going to be. My email is larry.young@mlb.com, and I will answer anything that comes my way.
Larry, thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to share your journey here on the Project Purple podcast and for all you're doing within the pancreatic cancer community. You're an inspiration and one of our superhumans.
Well, you as well, Dino. It was a pleasure meeting you, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Project Purple podcast. If you liked today's episode, make sure to hit that like button and feel free to share this episode and make sure to follow the Project Purple podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, please be safe and thanks for listening.